Hello, hello. Now, this is all very exciting for me because as you can see, I'm in the studio, so hello to all of you who have arrived. But we're running a slightly different and exciting version of Teams today, which means I can't see anybody, which is unusual for me. I can see a list of people down the right-hand side of my screen, but I can't see my usual celebrity squares sea of faces, which does worry me that there's nobody else in the meeting slightly. So I'm not quite sure. Ellie, is there a way that I can see my celebrity squares, or is this no longer possible with our showing a new webinar approach? Okay. Joanne, well, yeah, that there is method to our madness. So the method to our madness is very much that the recording is automatic. So the recording is now taking place. So if you're watching this on recording, hello, welcome to the waffle. But it does mean that we don't automatically record other people. So there is definitely method to the madness. Marianne, hello. Glad to hear you are here. That's a relief. I'm glad to hear it. So I can see that there are 19 people here, so that's a bit of a win. Copenhagen, lovely. Great to see you, Carla. And there are various AI support networks joining my room, which is a slightly terrifying thing, but I'm very happy to have them be here. Okay, and greetings from Riyadh as well. Sally, hello. Hello, hello. Okay, so as numbers creep up, I'm aware that we're in the middle of the day for most people. So many of you may well be back to back. Hello, Sarah. So we're going to give it till about 2 or 3 minutes past 11 to make sure we've got the majority of the people who are going to be here, and then we'll get cracking. Nikki, hello, lovely to see you, or not see you, and Elizabeth from Qatar. Look at that, we have a genuinely global audience, which is lovely, absolutely lovely. So here we go. Right, we're at 11:02. We'll give it till 11:03, I think, just to give people that bounce between meetings and the comfort break that we sometimes need in between meeting 1 and meeting 2. And then once we've done that, we shall get cracking with the content. But what I would like to say is thank you to all of you for making the time, giving up time in the middle of your day to join us, and hopefully you'll find the topic and the content valuable, useful, interesting, and a welcome diversion from the 9 to 5. So we're 03 or 02, Ellie? You make it 02. Okay, that's because I can't count. Well, never mind. We're going to start because the rate of increase of numbers has slowed, and we've got to 28 folk, and there's sort of 3 or 4 of us, so about 25 of you joining us, which is a pretty good ratio. So welcome one, welcome all, welcome to our masterclass on psychological safety and courageous leadership. We're building on the series we've been running throughout the year. So early in the year, January, we spoke to you about purpose. And then earlier around about April, we talked to you about trust. So when we segue between all of those things, we end up in a world where it's worth talking now about psychological safety and courageous leadership. So building on the elements we've been talking about through the year. So the process is going to be as interactive as I can make it. As I said, the new system has a little bit less interactivity in it, but a little bit more user friendliness from a recording and process point of view. So we'll make it as interactive as we possibly can, and we will expect you to be participatory contributors to the session. So I'll be asking questions. There's a couple of Mentimeters. There's opportunities to put stuff up in the chat. I did have in my notes the opportunity for people to raise their hand, but I'm not sure that's going to work. So there's going to have to be chat-based versions of that process. So that's where we start. So what I'd like to do is just kick off with a bit of a definition, a bit of an exploration of what do we think. So Ellie, could we have our first Menti, please? So if I'm sure you've used Mentimeter before, but in the unlikely event that you haven't, it's a fabulous little tool. Ellie's going to share a QR code. So you can either scan the QR code that's on the screen here, or you can go to menti.com and put the code in that you see there, which is 55759820. For some reason, the QR code is obscuring the other code, which I suspect is frustrating for many of you. So apologies for that, but the code is there right at the top of the screen as well. It's 55759820. And Ellie, can you tell me how many people have arrived? It looks like we've got about 20 odd people into 22, 23. Fabulous. Okay, that looks like most of the people on the call. So can we go on to our first question, please? Okay, so when you hear the phrase psychological safety, what comes to mind? So you can let us know. Okay. One person, therefore their view is the biggest view. But okay, got trust is large, be yourself, being able to challenge, support, comfort, free to speak openly, courageous conversations, no retaliation, my word. Slightly worrying that there is an environment in which retaliation exists in the first place, but never mind. We'll gloss over the kind of the flip side of what's going up here. Trust is coming up repeatedly. That's the nice big one in the center. Care, support, protection. Interesting. That's a fail fast, listen to you, constructive conflicts. It does all move around, which help mental health and wealth, which is a phrase my daughter used yesterday. Innovation, relaxing. Okay. So I was going to say something about kindness. Now we did talk about doing an entire session on kindness. We did a podcast on kindness a few months ago, and how kindness in leadership can be so powerful. But what have we got here? Protection. Let's just come up. Respect, innovation, thriving environment. Okay, lovely. So one of the great things about having such an engaged group is that I've got all this data. The downside is that every time I say something, it moves around and it's harder to pick out some of the themes. But we are picking out a lot of the big words you see there in the center are kindness, trust, care, and support. And then there's a lot of variations on those themes as we come around the outside. And yeah, I'm like I said, slightly worried about the no retaliation, because that implies that in other cases there is retaliation. But a lot of similar themes coming out. Okay, thanks, Alec. Could we go back to the slide, please? So we've got a starting point here, and what that does mean is that we saw on the word cloud, there's a lot of different understandings, and they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So we thought we'd start with some clear definitions, and we're using the work of Amy Edmondson here, who is the researcher who first identified this, or more accurately, the researcher who first put a name to this, because it had been around for a while, as we'll see later on, but she first put a name to it. And she describes it as the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated, or retaliated perhaps, for speaking up, sharing ideas, or admitting mistakes. So where we find psychological safety, we find that this generates the bullets you see below. So it encourages candour. So it encourages people to be honest with each other. It encourages learning. And the original research that inspired Edmondson to go into this in a bit more detail was, if you don't know, was originally done in a clinical setting. It was about drug errors. So trying to find out which sorts of teams made the fewest errors when administering drugs in care settings, to try and minimize that. And what happened was that psychologically safe teams created learning, i.e. why did we make that mistake and how do we avoid making that mistake? Again, it supports innovation, supports inclusion. People feel that they can be listened to, and allows you to take interpersonal risks, allows you to be honest with other people without fear of consequence. So what that means is that we as leaders need to be very clear with ourselves and with our teams that we know what it is and what it isn't. Yes, so yes, it is candour and learning and voice. It is an environment in which people can be listened to, are listened to, and things happen as a result of what they say. It isn't automatically consensus or comfort, and it absolutely isn't avoiding conflict. There was a recent article in a publication called The Fast Company, which is a kind of a slightly edgier online version of the Harvard Business Review, and there is a concern that psychological safety, the phrase psychological safety, is being weaponized. Yeah, now this is quite dramatic, of course, but there are increasing examples of organizations having the phrase psychological safety, or the idea of psychological safety, kind of undermined. So there's a couple of examples that came out in the article. One where the chief people officer was saying we need more training to help our leaders create an environment of psychological safety because that is valuable for the organization, and was shot down by the COO, whose view was, no, this is about all of this is giving people excuses to avoid performance conversations. The more we work on psychological safety, the more we don't have performance conversations, which of course is a massive misunderstanding. And a second example where a very robust and productive debate about a particular course of action at a senior leadership meeting was shut down and not allowed to continue when somebody accused it of not being psychologically, or rather of being psychologically unsafe because their opinion was being challenged. So we get a problem where people misunderstand what psychological safety is. And Amy Edmondson herself points out that psychological safety isn't an end state. Yeah, we are not creating psychological safety for the sake of psychological safety. We are creating psychological safety in pursuit of excellence. Excellence is the goal. Psychological safety is the catalyst that allows teams to pursue excellence because they have candour, learning, and they feel that they are going to be listened to. So what I did want to know is just asking into the chat, since the chat is going to be our main method of interaction today. Have you ever seen or heard of psychological safety being mislabeled, mistaken, misunderstood, either in the organization you work in or some of your clients? Oh. Okay. Happily, Suzanne, where we've got some examples of people seeing it soft. We've got some examples of people going, no, it's okay, and we've got a couple of people are going, okay, no, I've never heard of this before. Well, that's okay. That's why you're here, Jay. Hopefully, we can give you an understanding. But yeah, until we have complete kind of common ground, we have that common understanding of what psychological safety is, it's going to be, and particularly as we layer on the complexities that we all face of multi-generational workforces, and old Gen Xers like me working with new Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, and their understanding of what a safe space is may be different from what a psychologically safe space is. So we need to make sure that we have a clarity of understanding and a common definition. So now we know what it is. Why does it matter? Why are we talking about it? Well, it matters because it drives performance. It matters because it helps us journey towards excellence, as Edmondson said. And one of the bits of data that helps us know this to be true is Project Aristotle, which is something you may have heard of, which was a big project that Google ran for in 180 teams to try and find out what made their best teams their best teams. And what they came up with, what they uncovered, was that there are 5 factors in Google that drive excellence of teams. So dependability, yeah. So that means that the teams reliably do high quality work on time. And of course, if you can't trust your colleagues to deliver, we don't get that. If structure and clarity, so we know who does what in the team. There are clear roles, there are clear responsibilities. We know who's doing what. Meaning, yeah. So meaning is important. People need to feel connected to the work the team is doing. It matters to me that the thing my team is doing gets done. Impact. So we believe that the thing we are doing as a team makes a difference. We believe that if we deliver this project, the organization will be better, our clients will be better, the world will be a better place. We believe that it's going to make some difference in some way. And then psychological safety. Now, at the time, the phrase didn't really exist. Edmondson's work was kind of in parallel. There's been a little bit of nuance to how it works later. But what they found was that the psychological safety, as we now understand it, is the factor that makes the most difference. So without that, the other 4 have less impact. So once we have psychological safety, dependability, structure, meaning, impact, all get kind of superpowered, turbocharged by psychological safety, which is, again, that people feel safe to take interpersonal risks, ask questions, admit mistakes, disagree with each other. So we know from one of the world's highest performing organizations, from a very robust bit of data, that psychological safety is important. What does it do? Well, the outcomes are pretty straightforward. The outcomes are where we have those 5, and I say again, psychological safety, easy for me to say, is the kind of the anchor point for that, the catalyst that drives all the benefits of the other 4. We get innovation because people will take risks, they'll do things differently, they will make a choice, a change to how they do stuff. We get reliability, people do things better. Those drug dates we talked about right at the start are more effective. We get inclusion, people feel that all voices are being listened to, not just the most senior or the loudest or the oldest. And finally, performance, we get a better outcome, the teams deliver more. So with all of that, how do we create it? What is the way in which we as leaders can create an environment in which our people feel psychologically safe? Well, we think one of the most important elements that supports this is courage. And we think it works in a number of ways, because if you think about an environment in which you do not feel psychologically safe, courage is a risk. Yeah. So without psychological safety, courage becomes a risk, because speaking up has consequences. Speaking up has a cost. It may have a cost to your reputation. As Marianne says, yes, it may even be reckless, because it's a cost to your reputation, a cost to your relationships, possibly even a cost to your job. There's a great Simon Sinek TED talk, which you may have seen, about leaders making you feel safe, where he talks about a gate agent when he was on a flight who was yelling at people to get back in line and to not board and to board in the right order. And you're a 4, sir. You can't board with all the 3s. And being Simon Sinek, he said, well, why are you being so mean? Why are you treating us like cattle rather than human beings? And her response was, sir, if I don't follow the rules, I might lose my job. So even though the reality of dealing with real people should allow her some latitude, she did not feel safe to do anything other than exactly as she had been told. Yes. Now, the good news is, with psychological safety, courage becomes a catalyst, because courage allows people to do things differently, allows people to make different decisions, it allows people to overcome all sorts of barriers, it allows all sorts of things to happen. But we need courage, and it fuels innovation, it fuels trust, it fuels performance. It's a fabulous, fabulous thing. Now, the challenge we have is, how do we create it? And the reality, we think, is that leaders, we can't wait for safety to exist. We can't hope that safety is going to appear by magic. So leaders have to create that safety. So how do they do so? Well, we think they do so through courageous leadership. Now, there's a lot of words on this slide, so I'm going to try and keep them to as small a small introduction rather than going into depth, because the model has a lot of depth underneath it, and I'm very happy to to explore it with people offline. Excuse me. But what have we got here? We've got courage, courageous leadership. First of all, intellectual courage. So the ability to think differently, the desire to think differently, and the desire to make decisions, perhaps making those decisions without perfect information. Yeah. So, and I'm going to introduce the model, and then we'll go into each of the 4 elements in a little bit more detail. We've got commercial courage. So the ability to take calculated risks, to perhaps do something different, to set really stretching goals that will drive better commercial outcomes. As moral courage, the integrity that we all hope underpins our decision making, and the willingness to challenge where we see fit. And then physical courage, whether that's overcoming fear, whether that's demonstrating a readiness to act, or whether that's creating and sustaining our own resilience. But each of these 4 has their place, and courageous leadership is the stepping stone, is the starting point for creating psychological safety. So before we unpack each of these in a little bit more detail, Ellie, can we have our second Menti poll, please? Because I'm just interested to find out, in the room, which of these 4 you kind of instinctively feel you do most as a leader, speaks to you most as a leader, is the thing you find easiest to do as a leader. So we'll get the, there we go. Oh, look at that, lots of nice nice little bit of questions. So we go back to the Menti, which is the same slide. Mentimeter has made this system so that this has to be a competition. It isn't a competition because there is no right answer, but it does believe you're in a competition right now. So we've got 15, 16, 17 people ready. Okay, Ellie, can we open up the question, which is very simple. Okay, keep going. There we go. Which type of courage do you find easiest? And we're going to give you 30 seconds. So that's going to give you the answer. Counting down, got 17, got 18 answers. Got a lot of people with their thumbs up as well, which is good. I like that. Okay. Evidently 30 seconds was a little bit too long, but what do we get? Okay, so we've got more than 50% of the room self-diagnosed as finding moral courage the easiest thing to do. And we've got then a spread, a little bit of intellectual, a little bit of physical, only, interesting. Now, if we had more time and if we had, if I had an ability to collect a little bit more data, I'm already fascinated by the fact that maybe only 5% of the people are identifying as commercial courage. I wonder why that might be. Don't have time to go into that now. Maybe that's the next one. Maybe we'll go into commercial courage as an open question for our next masterclass. Thank you. So we'll come back to that in a sec. So I think we have the slides back, and Marianne, we will be going through the model in a little bit more detail. So hopefully that'll give you the data you're looking for as you were asking for the slide back up. Okay, so more detail, courage in action. So intellectual courage. What is intellectual courage? Well, intellectual courage is very simply, thinking differently, making decisions. Because ultimately, as a leader, we are often the person who makes the decision. So intellectual courage is the ability and the willingness to go against the flow, go against the herd almost, and make slightly different decisions. So what does that look like? Answer simple question. What does that look like as an intellectual question? Well, excuse me, my notes seem to have gone in the wrong order. So bear with me 1 second while I find those. There we go. Oh, that's right. So I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask you to think about this rather than put it in the chat, because the chat is a relatively clunky mechanism. I'd rather give you time in groups to explore this in detail. But intellectual courage is often as simple as framing something as a learning opportunity rather than an execution problem. So can you call to mind, has it happened in your career where doing just that, framing something as a learning opportunity, has helped you or your team to deliver more or beyond what you thought you could do? Commercial courage is the one that we found we lent into least, was perhaps the one that came least naturally to the group that we've got here. And this is about calculated risks, maybe setting stretch goals. And without commercial courage, the risk is that our teams will drift into mediocrity and will be comfortable with delivering exactly the same this year as they did last year, or maybe just a little bit more than they did last year. And sometimes what that needs is somebody to come up and shake the tin a little bit. Now, I'm reluctant to use Elon Musk as an example because he's become politically challenging, toxic, awkward over the last few years. And I'm not using this as any kind of endorsement of any views of Mr. Musk, but commercially he has been very courageous. He decided that electric cars were the thing before electric cars were the thing. He decided that reusable rockets were the thing for SpaceX, despite the fact that NASA had been ignoring reusable rockets for years. So commercial courage can make a real change. And I'm sure you can all call to mind examples in your careers where a stretch target, a real stretch target, has galvanized the team into action to deliver way beyond what we thought was possible, just by the act of saying, this is a goal, I believe you, I believe in you, I believe you can get to here. Moral courage. This is the one that for the people in our room we find easiest, the one we do most of. Demonstrating integrity, doing what we say we're going to do, challenging when needed, linking very clearly into that psychological safety. And again, this is one of those things whereby we all like to think this is the thing we do well. And we all like to think this is the thing that we find easiest. And I'm not saying that it's not, but I'd like you, again, hand on heart, not asking you to share this in the chat, but just to reflect. If you have ever been in a meeting and thought, oh, I don't really agree with that, or somebody really ought to say something because that's not quite right, and not been that somebody, I know I have. Yeah. Now, I'm sure that for many of us, we don't do that all the time. In fact, I hope that no one does it all the time. But we do all, I'm sure we've all found ourselves in that situation whereby something needed to be said and we did not say it. So we need to create the conditions in which moral courage can be demonstrated. Now, again, in the real world, this does happen. Patagonia is a great example. Rose Marcario, the CEO of Patagonia, in a very arguably commercially unwise, but morally absolutely correct, sued the US government. Yeah, so on behalf of Patagonia, she sued the US government to try and protect public lands. And there were some of the shareholders were unhappy, some of the people were unhappy, but it was, in her view, the right thing to do and aligned and very closely with Patagonia's values. And again, so we see people who are willing to make a stand. And then finally, there is physical courage. And despite my picture here, most of us don't run into burning buildings as our job. Yeah, so we're not expected to do this sort of thing, but I do rather like the image. But often we will need to overcome fear. Often we will need to act where we don't feel comfortable. And for all of us, we do need to show resilience. We do need to role model resilience for our teams. And again, there are great real world examples of this. The one that comes to mind for me is Jacinda Ardern, the former New Zealand Prime Minister, who during COVID, we remember that New Zealand basically cut themselves off during COVID, which was a thing you can do if you're in New Zealand. But she was very open with the entire country about how exhausted she was, how stressed she was, how overwhelmed she felt, and modeled kind of a little bit of family self-care. So again, if we're thinking about how we move this forward, one of the challenges I have for you is what is from a resilience point of view, perhaps, what is one small boundary that you could perhaps, either you do or you could perhaps set that sustains your energy and your resilience? It doesn't have to be a big thing. For me, for example, one of the things that helps me is that 3 or 4 years ago, I got kicked out of the house by my family and put into the shed. So if you've ever seen me working from home, you'll see that I work in a shed. Now, on the one hand, I've been kicked out into the shed, so physically that's cold. But what it does mean is that my laptop is in the shed, and that when I shut my laptop, I then walk for 20 yards down the garden to the house. And there is a physical barrier between me and where work happens. And that helps me disconnect and helps me be more resilient, because I can go, you know what? Yeah, work is over there in the blue shed at the end of the garden. Home is over here in the blue house with the family. Now, we could, of course, unpack all of these elements of courage in more detail, and we'll be asking you to do that in your breakout rooms very shortly. But what I wanted to share with you is how we think these two things, these courageous behaviors and psychological safety, fit together. Because ultimately, this is about a world in which leaders need to go first. Yeah. Now, those of you who have military background, officers eat last. I get that. On this occasion, officers go first. Because if we want to be working in creating and reinforcing a psychologically safe environment, well, everything starts with leaders. Everything starts with the leaders. Because if I'm in an environment that does not feel psychologically safe for me or for anybody else, I can't just sit back and wait for it to appear by magic. I need to demonstrate courage. Maybe that's I admit a mistake. Maybe it's I make a decision on a moral basis. It doesn't really matter what I do. I just need to do something that demonstrates courage and gives people a foothold of safety. And that feels a little bit safer than it did before. Okay, so my boss has done something that makes me in their team feel a little bit safer than I felt before. And you know what? The boss has put their hand up and said, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to put my hand up and say, yes, boss, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Because I feel that what I'm seeing is that will not cause me to be punished or lose my job or any of those things. And that then starts to be magnified. And we see in organizations and in teams courageous behavior. Now, we might call this courageous followership. Those of us who've worked with us for a while will know we like the idea of followership. Is if I feel psychologically safe, I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of courageous behavior. Yeah, asking a difficult question, challenging an assumption, asking why we've always done it this way around here. Putting their hand up for a project that they don't really know what's involved, but they feel that they'd like to get part of it. And that raising of the hand, that courageous behavior reinforces the psychological safety that other people are feeling. And we have increased psychological safety. We feel better. We feel more comfortable. We feel happier to put our hands up. We have more disagreement. It becomes more robust, becomes more honest, which then in turn allows leaders to be more courageous and set more stretching targets and more challenging goals, because they know what they're getting the data from their teams who are volunteering the information, which in turn creates a feeling of greater safety. And we get this fabulous self-reinforcing virtuous spiral of psychological safety and courageous leadership. And of course, it works the other way as well. Of course it does. If you don't have courageous leadership, the feeling of psychological safety diminishes, which reduces the amount of courageous behavior, which diminishes the amount of and so on. You get this spiral of despair into a place where nobody's going to put a hand up for anything. So we believe that this virtuous circle, virtual spiral, is absolutely self-reinforcing. But again, that our role as leaders is to go first. We need to demonstrate courageous leadership. Now, I've been talking for 20 minutes or so, and I would like to know what you think. So what's going to happen now? Ellie's going to create some breakout rooms. I'm not quite sure how many, because some of the people here are AIs, and we will make sure that the AIs are in the same group as their person, if we possibly can. So Ellie's just creating some breakout rooms for us. And what we'd like you to do in your breakout rooms is to have a conversation about these 2/3 questions. Depends on whether you believe question one is one or two questions. First question is very simple. Where have you seen psychological safety missing? So where have you seen environments in which there was not enough psychological safety, or it wasn't there at all? And what was the impact? What happened as a result of that? Follow-up question: how could courageous leadership have changed the outcome? How could courageous leadership have altered what happened in those circumstances. So we're going to put you into breakout groups for 10 minutes. We'd like you to nominate, please, a spokesperson to report back, and to report back briefly when you come back, because I think we've got 10 breakout groups. Is that right, Ellie? Yeah. So I won't be asking everybody to report back because we won't have time for a story from all 10, but I will be picking on a couple. So if you have a particularly good story, do come back and please volunteer to share that with the group. So Ellie, can we have 10 minutes? If you can't take the slide with you into the breakout room, I'm afraid. So either take a screenshot or a photo or write it down or something. But make sure you've got a sense of what the questions are. So where have you seen psychological safety missing, and what impact did that have? And follow-up question, how could courageous leadership have changed that outcome? Right, okay. So I think everybody's now back. Lovely. Oh. So Marianne and I were just having a bit of a catch up, but I think all the rooms have now closed themselves. So I'm going to pick on 2 rooms to give us a summary of your conversation, if I may. I'm going to go to Simon, because we know that Simon was able to speak to at least 3 other people because they were physically in a room with him. So team Simon, Che, James and Natalia, could I ask your spokesperson to give us a 1-minute summary of your conversation, please?
Hi, Iain. It's Che. I'm representing the team that you've already mentioned. I think in terms of missing, we agreed that in the previous role, sort of senior management level, there were some of the psychological safety missing. And I think the areas that we identified in terms of the impact was difficult to create a harmonious environment. There were repetitive actions not leading necessarily to any improvements. Definitely a blame game, which then creates a kind of culture of negativity. And then good quality staff, which kind of ties in with reduced motivation. The good quality staff then ultimately end up leaving, which increases a kind of turnover of headcount.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I work with a lot of clients who claim that they have a lessons learned process, and the challenge I always have is, do you have a lessons learned process or do you have a lessons identified process, which would create those repetitive actions that you've just talked about, where we do the same thing over and over again. Super. Thank you, team Che, James, Natalia, and Simon. I'm also going to go to Joanne, because I briefed her that I was going to go to her afterwards. So Joanne, how was your conversation?
Well, the good news is we could use our cameras, so we could actually see each other, which was great in the breakout rooms. Yeah, it was good. We looked at kind of 2, you can see me now, 2 examples. One is where it's about characteristics and behaviours, and people set up moments in time where they dominate and they don't listen. And the example that was given was they've already made their mind up and they turn up. So there's no safety in challenging me or coming up with an idea, even if I ask you for one. So that it was all the characteristics and behaviour stuff, and also where people almost deliberately or carelessly don't create the right environment. So the good old town hall where the leader will congregate the masses on the shop floor and there's hundreds of people for a Q&A. No one's ever going to ask a proper question or feel that they can be open in that kind of environment. So it's sort of exclusive and is a bit of a safety barrier. So we looked at the nonsense that sometimes comes out of the good book of leadership. I've got to have a town hall and allow people to ask me questions, and it doesn't really work. So we thought a bit about what does courageous leadership look like. It's normally the courage of the other people who can feed forwards or backwards to those people who run meetings like that or run open forums like that, is to say, before you go and do another town hall like the one you did last time, maybe we could consider doing it in some different way.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, right. So Ellie, could we have the slides back, please? Because I'm conscious that we promised people that we would be done in an hour. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move on to the final couple of slides, and Of course, you'll have your own ideas, but we always want to leave you with a couple of kind of practical applications, suggestions of real world things you can do that will help you to build or reinforce your own courageous leadership. So first of all, intellectual courage, which was, I think, there were four of our 18 who claimed that as their strength. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if we frame work as a learning problem, so we create the conditions in which we go, you know what, we don't yet know how to do this. And I'm open to ideas. The opposite of what Joanne just talked about, of I've made my decision already. I'm genuinely open to ideas. I don't know how we're going to do this. Let's find out. Moral courage, admit fallibility, admit you have got it wrong. Admit you have made a mistake. Because you know what, we do all make mistakes, and having the integrity to sit there and go, you know what, yeah, I made that mistake, I'm owning it, will create an environment, a kind of psychological environment in which people feel that that's okay. Commercially, get input early. Get people's ideas before you have the town hall. Get people's ideas before you make your own decision, because you never know where the next brilliant idea is coming from. And if you create, if you ask your teams to simply execute your ideas, you are missing out. And then finally, model self-care. So physical courage, like I said, we none of us run into burning buildings. Well, I don't run into burning buildings. Some of you may. But ultimately, we can demonstrate that physical courage is also about looking after ourselves. So modeling that self-care. Yeah, I saw when you were in the breakout rooms, one of my colleagues, Marcus, and I'm always very impressed with Marcus, because Marcus has a great ability to compartmentalize his life and to say to us as his fellow colleagues, I'm not going to be online for an hour because I'm going for a bicycle ride, because that is one of the ways he recharges. And I go, you know what, I should do that as well. So modeling self-care, whatever that looks like for you, make sure you can model it, and then your teams will feel, you know what, that's okay, I can do that too. So to bring this all to a conclusion, we absolutely believe that psychological safety and courageous leadership are fundamentally linked, and that when you have courageous leadership, it creates psychological safety, which in turn creates courageous followership or courageous behavior, which in turn creates more psychological safety. You've heard me do this before, but it's so important that we want you to hear about it again. And so we encourage you, as you go back into your real world, to just make those small adjustments in your own courageous behavior and your own courageous leadership that will create the psychological safety in your teams. That is the starting point for all those benefits that Google and Project Aristotle and many, many other studies have demonstrated. So with that in mind, it is 11:59 and 15 seconds. I promised you we would finish on time. I'm going to thank you all for your attention. Ellie, if we can drop the slides down, please. Thank you for coming. We have recorded this. It will be available if you want to either share it or look back over it. And thank you all for your time.